long did you live in Japan?
Man, probably 18 years, something like that.
18 years. What age did you move there?
Went there when I was probably 16, 17, something like that.
And why did you go there when you were that young?
I wanted to learn the martial arts. I wanted to learn healing, herbology.
In the pantheon of martial arts cinema, few names cast longer shadows than Bruce Lee and Steven Seagal. One was a blazing comet that burned brightly for only a moment before vanishing forever. The other, a towering, brooding figure who has spent half a century walking the earth like a self-proclaimed last samurai. Bruce Lee redefined what it meant to be a fighter on screen and off, turning philosophy into kinetic poetry. Steven Seagal, decades later, built an entire persona on the claim that he was one of the few real martial artists ever to grace Hollywood. Between these two men lies a rumored encounter, a private, brutal, life-altering clash that supposedly took place in a modest Culver City backyard sometime around 1970. No photographs, no second eyewitness, no mention in any reputable biography, and yet the story refuses to die. For more than 50 years, whispers have circulated. A cocky teenage Steven Seagal, still spelled S-E-A-G-A-L back then, before the extra L in the ponytail, drove from Orange County to Los Angeles, knocked on Bruce Lee's door, demanded a fight, and left on a stretcher after the dragon humiliated him with his hands tied behind his back, literally. The tale resurfaced with explosive force in 2023 when a YouTube channel presented a single man claiming to have been there that day. His testimony went viral, racking up millions of views and reigniting one of the oldest and most delicious what-if debates in martial arts lore. This is not a simple debunking or a blind defense of the rumor. It is an exhaustive exploration, a forensic autopsy of a legend that has grown its own mythology. We will examine every thread, the timelines that don't quite line up, the interviews that contradict themselves, the psychological undercurrents that keep the story alive, and the strange cultural need for two icons who never shared a film set to have shared a battlefield. By the end, we may not possess absolute proof of what happened on that forgotten afternoon, if anything happened at all, but we will understand why the question itself has become more important than any possible answer. The origin of the whisper. The rumor did not begin with the 2023 video. It has been floating in martial arts circles since at least the late 1980s, passed along in gyms and dojo locker rooms like an urban legend with just enough plausibility to sting. The earliest printed versions appear in obscure fanzines and on primitive martial arts BBS forums in the 1990s, always phrased cautiously, "I heard from a guy who trained with a guy." By the early 2000s, Seagal himself began dropping cryptic hints in interviews, never confirming a fight, but never quite denying the existence of some private encounter with the little dragon either. The 2023 resurrection, however, was different. A channel specializing in lost martial arts history uploaded a 22-minute documentary built almost entirely around one man, an older gentleman who claimed to have been Seagal's friend and driver on the fateful day. Speaking directly to camera, voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine emotion, he described a teenage Seagal, brash, 6'4", already built like a refrigerator, marching up to Bruce Lee's home unannounced, demanding to test himself against the master. When no one answered the front door, they allegedly walked around back, interrupted a private training session, and issued the challenge in front of Lee's students. According to this witness, Bruce laughed at first, not cruelly, but with the weary amusement of a man who had seen every kind of challenger. Then, the story goes, he accepted, placed his hands behind his back as a handicap, and proceeded to dismantle the young Seagal in under 2 minutes, using only his legendary sidekicks and footwork. The final blow? A low shin kick that dead-legged Seagal, followed by a sweep that sent the future action star crashing to the concrete. The witness claims Seagal was so badly injured that an ambulance had to be called, and that Bruce Lee walked away without ever unfolding his arms. The video exploded. Within weeks, it had been reposted, reacted to, dissected, and memed across YouTube, TikTok, and Reddit. Old Seagal interviews were scrubbed for clues. Frame-by-frame analyses of his facial expressions when Bruce Lee's name was mentioned became their own subgenre. And suddenly, a rumor that had lived on the fringes for decades was mainstream fighting folklore. Part 2. The Day in Question. Reconstructing the Scene. Let us imagine for a moment that the story contains at least a grain of truth. The year is 1970 or possibly early 1971. Bruce Lee is 30 years old, living in a modest single-story house on Beverly Drive in Culver City. He is at the absolute peak of his physical powers, but also in flux, still recovering from a severe back injury suffered in a training mishap the previous year, preparing to leave America for Hong Kong, where Golden Harvest awaits with the contract that will make him a global superstar. Most afternoons, he trains in the small backyard with a rotating cast of private students, Dan Inonsanto, Herb Jackson, occasionally Hollywood friends like James Coburn or Steve McQueen. On this particular day, the exact date unknown because no calendar entry exists, a car pulls up containing 2 young men from Fullerton, roughly an hour's drive southeast. One is Steven Craig Seagal, age 19 or possibly 20. His exact birth year has been fudged over the decades, but 1951 to 52 is most credible. He is already tall and thickly muscled from weight training and whatever informal martial arts exposure he has had, but he is not yet the polished Aikido stylist the world will come to know. That journey begins in earnest only after he moves to Japan later in 1971 or 72. According to the lone witness, they knock. No answer. They walk around back. They see Bruce demonstrating 1-inch punches or perhaps the lightning chain kicks that will later appear in Enter the Dragon. Seagal steps forward and issues the challenge. What happens next depends entirely on whose version you believe. The eyewitness account, in his own words. The 2023 witness, who has since deleted his social media and gone silent, described the fight in vivid, almost cinematic detail. He said, "Okay, kid, you want to spar? Fine, but I'm not going to use my hands." And he put both hands behind his back like he was taking a stroll in the park. Steve rushed in, trying to grab him, Aikido style, but Bruce was already moving. Every time Steve reached, Bruce wasn't there. Then, boom, side kick to the thigh. Boom, another to the ribs. Steve's face went white. You could hear the impact. It sounded like kicking a heavy bag. Less than 2 minutes later, Bruce swept his legs and Steve hit the concrete hard. He couldn't get up. We had to call an ambulance. And Bruce Lee walked away without ever unfolding his arms. Powerful testimony, visceral, believable on an emotional level, and completely uncorroborated. The impossible timeline. Here is where the story begins to crumble under scrutiny. Steven Seagal's martial arts beginnings. Every credible source, including Seagal's own authorized biographies and interviews given before he began mythologizing his past, places the start of his serious Aikido training in Japan no earlier than 1971 to 1972. Before that, he practiced some judo and karate as a teenager, but nothing that would prepare him to challenge Bruce Lee. In 1970, he was, by his own later admission, a dishwasher and dojo cleaner in California, not a prodigy ready to take on the greatest martial artist alive. Bruce Lee's schedule and location. Bruce spent large portions of 1970 to 1971 traveling between Los Angeles and Hong Kong. When in LA, he trained privately and was extremely selective about visitors. Uninvited challengers were turned away at the gate, sometimes politely, sometimes not. There is no record in Linda Lee Cadwell's memoirs, in Dan Inosanto's exhaustive oral histories, or in the mountains of FBI files released on Bruce Lee, yes, they exist, of any such incident. The ambulance problem. An ambulance call in Culver City in 1970 would have generated a paper trail. Hospitals kept records. None have ever surfaced, despite decades of researchers looking. The hands behind the back detail. This is the most cinematic flourish, and the most suspicious. Bruce Lee was famous for demonstrating kicks with hands behind the back in controlled settings, but only as a teaching tool against cooperative students, never in an actual challenge fight. The idea that he would risk his newly healed back against an unknown 240-pound teenager using such a handicap strains credulity.
Seagal's own words, a tapestry of contradictions. Over the years, Steven Seagal has given dozens of interviews touching on Bruce Lee. The narrative shifts depending on the decade. In the 1980s and early 1990s, respectful, almost reverent. He speaks of Lee as a pioneer who opened doors for all Asian martial arts in cinema. Mid-1995s, after becoming a star, more nuanced. He begins drawing distinctions between real fighters and movie fighters, carefully never placing Lee in the latter category, but implying others belong there. 2000s, 2010s, cryptic. When directly asked if he ever met Bruce Lee, he often says things like, "I knew people who knew him very well," or "We had mutual friends like James Coburn." In a 2012 interview with Michael Javellana, often misquoted online, Seagal describes sparring with Dan Inosanto on the set of Out for Justice, and then segues into praising Bruce Lee's sidekick as the best he's ever felt. Many have interpreted "felt" to mean he experienced it personally. A careful listen reveals he's talking about training with Inosanto, not Lee. The most commonly cited smoking gun is a clip where Seagal supposedly says he fought a close friend of Bruce Lee's. The full context shows he is clearly referring to the filmed fight scene with Inosanto. The leap from "I fought Dan Inosanto in a movie" to "Bruce Lee beat me up in real life" requires several Olympic-level mental gymnastics. The Brandon Lee anachronism. One of the strangest inconsistencies comes from Seagal himself. In multiple interviews, he has claimed that he and Bruce Lee used to joke about how their young sons looked alike, little Caucasian boys, implying warm, repeated social contact. Brandon Lee was born February 1, 1965. Seagal's first child, Kintaro, was born in 1975, 2 years after Bruce Lee's death. Either Seagal is misremembering by more than a decade, or he is conflating timelines in a way that undermines his credibility on the entire subject. The psychology of the myth. Even if the fight never happened, and the evidence strongly suggests it did not, the persistence of the story reveals something profound about both men and about the martial arts community itself. Bruce Lee died at 32, forever frozen as the ultimate untouchable icon. No losses, no decline, no embarrassing paparazzi photos. He is pure myth. Steven Seagal, by contrast, has lived long enough to see his star rise and fall, to be mocked by younger generations, to become a punchline in some circles. To be linked even negatively with Bruce Lee is to be elevated into the same conversation as a god. For Seagal, the rumor, whether he started it, encouraged it, or simply never bothered to stamp it out, serves a purpose. It implies that the only reason he never surpassed Lee is because Lee died too young to give him the chance. It transforms potential rivalry into tragic destiny. For fans, the story satisfies a deeper itch, the fantasy that martial arts prowess can be settled in a backyard the way heavyweight boxing is settled in a ring. We want our heroes to have tested each other in the crucible of real combat. The verdict. After examining every interview, every biography, every timeline discrepancy, and every first-hand account available as of November 2025, the conclusion is unavoidable. There was no backyard fight between Bruce Lee and Steven Seagal in 1970-1971. The story originates from a single uncorroborated witness decades after the fact, contradicts established timelines on multiple fronts, and relies on details like hands behind back, ambulance, etc. that grow more theatrical with each retelling. Seagal himself has never explicitly confirmed it and has in fact given contradictory accounts that place him far from any meaningful interaction with Lee. What likely did happen is far more mundane. Seagal, like thousands of other young martial artists in Southern California, was aware of Bruce Lee, may have attended the same demonstrations or tournaments from a distance, and almost certainly met people who trained with Lee. Over the years, those second and third-hand connections were embellished, first by fans, then by Seagal's cryptic interviewing style, and finally by the viral 2023 video until they became the legend we know today. Living in the shadow. The real fight between Bruce Lee and Steven Seagal was never physical. It was temporal. One man burned so brightly that he illuminated the path for everyone who followed, and one of those followers has spent 50 years trying and failing to fully step out of that light. Bruce Lee remains the benchmark. Steven Seagal remains the man who desperately wants you to believe he could have been the benchmark in another life, on another timeline, if only fate had granted him one afternoon in Culver City. And perhaps that is the most human truth of all.